Welcome to today's New England HIMSS webinar provided by premier sponsor Proofpoint, the Healthcare Threat Briefing, Protecting Identities from Cyber Attackers, presented by Ryan Witt, Proofpoint resident CISO of the Healthcare Customer Advisory Board. Ryan is the Vice President of the Industry Solutions Group at Proofpoint. He is a recognized healthcare cybersecurity executive and a frequent speaker at HIMSS, Chime, and other entities. Previously, Ryan was with the healthcare leader for Fortinet and Juniper Networks, where he also was the chair for their respective healthcare customer advisory boards. All lines today have been muted upon entry. Please send your questions via the Q&A feature, and Ryan will answer them throughout the presentation. Please join me in welcoming Ryan today.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here, and always excited to talk to the HIMSS community. Today's topic is broadly a healthcare threat briefing to kind of give a little bit of an insight about what we see from Proofpoint's point of view about the broader sort of cybersecurity landscape. We will hone in a little bit on how identities are increasingly a target for cyber criminals, cyber attackers, and how do you protect those identities. Just a brief couple words about Proofpoint for those of you who maybe are not familiar with our organization. This is my only, I guess, infomercial slide, if you will. And I say some of these things here in terms of our level of adoption with those organizations who are considered healthcare organizations by the Fortune organization, our adoption with amongst the health insurer community around children pediatric care hospitals or kind of your larger sort of health systems, because I'm going to show some data later on about where we believe the threat vector is most prevalent within healthcare. And I want you to understand that conclusions we draw from a research sort of point of view is really based on not only the broad adoption that Proofpoint has within the community, but also an opportunity for our threat researchers to pretty carefully survey the landscape and then make some conclusions about where the threat activity is most prevalent at any one point in time. Beyond that, of course, we're also very active in the prevalent sort of healthcare associations, and we do have one advisory board dedicated to an industry that is dedicated to healthcare, and now going on our 6th year. So we try to take this industry really, really seriously. Okay, infomercial over. Going to cover these 5 main themes with regards to today's presentation, recognizing the attendee list and the diverse nature of those who have signed up for this webinar, and recognizing that many of them seemingly, you can't necessarily always draw definitive conclusions, but seemingly you have either limited or limited sort of exposure to cybersecurity. We're going to start off with a primer around kind of like just what is phishing, what is social engineering, what is this thing that is called BEC, or business email compromise. That's an FBI term. Just to kind of get a level setting of the landscape. We will go into then more broadly about where do we see the threat landscape overall. So this would include healthcare, to be sure, but it's some more broad, I should say, macro trends. Then we will hone in more on what are we seeing specifically within healthcare from that sort of landscape. And then we'll go in a little bit even further, and then we'll get into some, I guess, a little bit the weeds, so to speak, and looking at how do you leverage threat insight. So there's a tremendous amount of data available in the marketplace to explain very clearly within healthcare which departments are being attacked, which people are being attacked, why are they being attacked, what is the presumed motivation of those threat actors. And then once you understand who's being attacked, that is can be a clue, or can be an important variable to start driving, or certainly shaping your overall security strategy. And then we'll close with this protecting identities, and then how do you actually choose the right sort of security controls to best safeguard healthcare. And that tends to be a very philosophical conversation, because it can be technology based, it can be people based, process, procedure based. There's lots of ways you can against where you think your institution or your organization is being attacked. Okay, let's first start with the primer. And just start off by saying that the reality of cybercrime is very different now than, say, what it was 5 years or so ago, where it was a hacktivist trying to, with an agenda, or people were just trying to see how far they can, they can push the vulnerabilities of a technology environment. So we've moved on a long way, not necessarily in a good way, but the cyber security marketplace has changed quite dramatically. And this has become legitimate, if that is the right word. I always wonder if that is the right word, but it's become a substantial line of business within many cyber criminal organizations. And so they might have a line of businesses around racketeering, not that, but you consider cybercrime as one of their lines of business. And as a result, their motivation is almost always monetization of their attack. So the preponderance of the serious attacks that the industry is seeing is often the result of some sort of cyber criminal organization, or some sort of nation state entity. And the ramifications of their attack really are quite significant. So for those of you, I guess in this on this webinar, given the nature of the HIMSS chapter, we're on that eastern sort of seaboard. That Colonial Pipeline attack, basically handcuffed parts of the country for getting access to gas for a few days. Cast your mind back in the COVID pre-vaccination sort of timeline, when they stole Pfizer's sort of vaccine data that was leaked onto the marketplace. And then there have been, admittedly, a small number of examples, but there have been some examples where a ransomware attack has closed down hospital systems, and that resulted in a small number of cases, death of a patient, but in many large, much more pronounced number of cases, delays in procedures, or having to reconstitute a patient's sort of medical record, or recalibrate procedures that were kind of planned, et cetera. So it's the far-reaching reality of cybercrime. And beyond that, you see data is being exposed in the marketplace. There's a lot of scams. Teenagers are more and more being targeted by these nefarious activities. So there's essentially what we're trying to say is everybody is a target. And I do recall being in some, well, I'll be very clear, in a Chime session a couple of years ago, and some institutions thought, what, we're based in, a smaller, more rural part of the country. We're not really a likely target. Everybody's a target. So I think that's something that's I just want to make sure we understand here. And I think this is, the change in how we work as an industry, be it healthcare or beyond healthcare, has really emphasized this point. The old world, if that's the right sort of phraseology, meant that you essentially had all your data, all your systems, your EMR, your modalities, your clinical sort of environment, all essentially based in one entity, this sort of castle moat sort of structure. You put as much defenses around that castle, and you let some services go beyond the castle walls. But eventually the strategy was you had to really make sure the castle was very well protected. Now, of course, almost everything is a cloud type sort of service. Your patients can be everywhere depending on jurisdictions and regulations, etc. Your third party network and your employees can be more remote, and so we have to make sure multiple parts of that. There isn't necessarily a castle anymore. We have to make sure that all parts of that entity are now being protected. So how do attackers exploit people? And let's be very clear here. Unlike, say, 5, 6, 7 years ago, where when we were to have these sort of presentations, we would talk a lot about what's called a zero-day attack, or when somebody, a hacker, for example, has discovered a vulnerability in a network. So that'd be the zero-day attack, the first person to discover it, and then they would have a competitive advantage, so to speak, to go exploit that vulnerability. Then eventually they would release that information onto the dark web, and the hacking community would exploit that same sort of vulnerability. So that's no longer really the thrust of attacks these days. Attacks these days are really oriented around attacking people. It's much easier to train up a small army of would-be threat actors to attack people on email than it is to go teach them the intricacies of security administration protocols and how to look for vulnerabilities within that environment. So people are being attacked, and they do so in lots of sort of ways. They write these very compelling sort of emails that dupe somebody to engage with them, and then they unwittingly will run code for them. They will induce them to hand over credentials, and they will induce them to transfer funds, data, etc., over to the would-be threat actor. So this is kind of one way that are the main way that people are being attacked, and they're using all sorts of techniques these days to really try to befriend their target, I should say, and engage with that community. It's not just about email. So more and more you're seeing things called smishing, which is basically using text as a tool to augment their attacking, vishing, which is a voicemail sort of approach, and trying to attack on social media accounts. So all sort of communication channels are vulnerable and open for attack. And just be mindful that, yes, email is still the most prevalent channel, but there are definitely other channels that also require security. One of the key techniques that cyber criminals use when they're attacking people is they really try to play on your emotions. So they play on your emotions. They try to befriend you and leverage a trust. They might purport to come. They might send you an email purporting to come from somebody else, and on the surface, it appears to be an email from a trusted colleague or a trusted partner, to trusted member of your supply chain. They try to exploit that, and I'd really try to exploit fatigue, timing. So we have seen multiple examples where just multitasking tends to be a break in a break in the armor, where people are just doing so many things at once that their judgment just slips a little bit, and that can result in an exploit landing within the environment. So what is phishing? Phishing is emails that essentially do phish for information and access. And I think in old school, sort of yesteryear sort of ways of phishing, they'd be very clear about, this is what I'm trying to do and trying to achieve. And we've all seen those kind of emails from, I think, the proverbial Nigerian prince. I have some money I'm trying to park. And those emails have been sent for well over a decade. And And one of the reasons they keep getting sent is they were working for a long time. So that's a much more straightforward form of phishing. I think be aware though that it's become much more sophisticated, and often the emails start off these days with being seemingly innocuous or asking for very basic forms of information, the kind of thing that in and of itself are not really problematic, the information that you could hand over. Just be aware that they are always building this much broader jigsaw puzzle, and what could be handed over is innocuous in and of itself, but it does unlock something that maybe can't be seen to the sender of the email or the recipient of the email. So that's one thing we see a lot of. They use what's called worms, which essentially are lures, which is essentially the worm. That's message that try to bait you into action, and then they try to get you to engage with them. So that's how when you kind of get hooked, and that's when that's example where you get a breach. There are three primary phishing threats, malicious links. Go click on this link. For many of you on this call that you might think, well, why would I ever do that? That's fair. Recognize though that there's many people within a healthcare institution that the nature of their job is they have to go click on links. Like that's just their job. And probably the best example of that is anybody who's involved in recruiting new employees into your organization. They have to go download resumes or click on LinkedIn sort of profiles or whatever. There are people who they don't do anything wrong per se, but the nature of their job means that they're vulnerable. Same thing, malicious attachments. I mean, you're downloading a resume because you have a job advertised, somebody wants to work for your organization, they send you a resume, your job is to to open that resume, but that's where you do have exposure. And then lastly, and frequently, just this request for sensitive data. Here's just a couple of examples of things that we have seen in the wild. It's one of those things where, again, playing on your emotions, your mailbox is going to be shut down if you don't verify. It's flying a verified sort of logo. It looks on the surface of it somewhere you could assume it to be legitimate. I mean, there are clues. There are clues in here that that it's problematic. I mean, if you just look at kind of beyond just the Microsoft Office 365 team, you look at the actual true where the email address is, that doesn't really make sense. The spelling mistake and shut down. So there are things you could look for, but this is one of the examples where if you're working really quickly, you're doing multiple things at once. We've all made mistakes in this sort of area, or many of us have. And then the other form of cyber crime is around social engineering, this art of deception, human hacking. And it's ways they can use psychology essentially to trick you or dupe you into taking an action. The areas here that like to call out here is for concern is just masquerading as someone you know or trust. I mean, this is very prevalent sort of attack method. They'll go on to LinkedIn, they'll figure out where their target is in the organization. They can, in many cases, work out an organization chart and figure out, okay, that might be the target's boss or that target's colleague. I'm going to send an email. And I'm going to then maybe go on to Facebook and recognize that target's colleagues or boss is on vacation or traveling or whatever. I'm going to send an email purporting to be from that person, asking them for an action because I'm away from the office, that sort of thing. They tend to hack. They tend to do things that either attack you at a time when your emotions might be heightened, or they write an email that is intended to heighten your emotions. Often it is the request is urgency. Often it feels too good to be true. I mean, we are at the start of football season. I cannot tell you how many times. In fact, there was one around the Patriots, I can recall not that long ago, when there was the click here and you'll win chance to get playoff games to a Patriots playoff game. And so these sort of lures are so frequently used to go get people to interact with their with the would-be attacker. So
Ryan, there is
yes,
a question.
sure.
So the question is, what is the number one recommendation you would offer to healthcare providers so that they would make sure the organization-wide, the right people are handling the threats in the right way?
I mean, it's a great question. It's a potentially complicated answer. In my experience, most healthcare institutions have either limited resources, limited budget, limited technology. They essentially find it difficult to plug all their security gaps. That's a very common challenge I find with many healthcare institutions. And so you have to do your best to understand your organization and understand where the vulnerabilities are likely to be highest, and essentially make trade-offs and layer in your defenses in the area that's most likely to be attacked. So, I mean, we can use a football example as we start the football season. If somebody is constantly running the ball up the middle and they're getting, 8 yards per carry, then you probably want to stop that. And if you can't stop that, then you're going to be very challenging to win that game. If you have a clinical research organization that is world renowned for its research, and therefore people want to steal your IP, and they keep attacking your clinical engineer, your clinical research organization, you're going to want to layer in your protection there.
Thank you.
Yeah. So request for help, sender can't prove identity. So these are all kind of tactics. Business email compromise. This actually is the most costly form of attack for healthcare and for every institution. So this is where a fraudster poses as somebody else and either pretend to be you. So they'll take over or attempt to take over your email domain. They will send emails on your behalf, pretending to be you, and then they will social engineer an attack. They will ask your colleague, they will ask your partner, they will ask your clinician, whatever, for something, or in other cases where they actually do successfully take over your account, and they actually then, in an email context, become you, and again, they will social engineer their activities for nefarious gain. Almost always BEC is around monetization. It's always around some sort of how can we quickly monetize this attack, get a quick ROI, if you will, return on your investment. So it'll be things around gift carding. Those are very quick to monetize. Redirect to payroll. Hey, I've changed banks or whatever. Supplier invoice fraud. I see they'll recognize you're having some construction work done, and they'll see the name of your construction company. They'll send you an invoice. Real estate fraud, probably less now around COVID-19 scam, but I mean, I think categorically, in the first couple 3 years of COVID, those were by a long way the most utilized campaign that any threat researcher has ever seen. So how the COVID-19 sort of story evolved was a constant ever-changing news cycle and a constant ever-changing scam that resulted in the use of that news cycle to go try to exploit people and their emotions, etc. Here's an example of a gift card scam. I plan to surprise staff with some gifts. Which do you think would make an excellent choice? It purports to come from the president of the organization, the CEO. If you look at it more carefully, the CEO is probably not sending it from a Gmail account, but these are the types of exploits we see very, very regularly in the marketplace. And I'm sure those on this call have also seen them. Okay, that was our primer. Now getting on to the overall threat landscape. Email has remained by some distance the most number one threat vector. In fact, I think HIM's most recent cybersecurity survey said, I'm going to get the number wrong, but it's about 72, 73%, probably off by a percent or two, of all cyber events within healthcare. The initial point of compromise is email. So if there's one area that you can lock down, and it goes back to that, to that question a little bit earlier, like what's the one thing you can do? It is try to secure your email environment. Other areas get more notoriety, they get more press. I mean, AI is really hot right now. And will AI become a theme in attacks that we see going forward? To be sure, yes. Today, though, the threat is really on email. That's the number one thing that you need to think about. And so much so that I think it was Verizon, they do probably, the most seminal threat research report that they produce annually. There's 3 or 4 organizations that are really known for their threat research reports. Verizon definitely is one of those organizations. I think they wrote in their most recent report, which got released about 10 months ago, they basically said, essentially, we could have cut and paste from the 2010 report in terms of the executive summary about what the challenges were, because nothing's really changed. Techniques have evolved and for sure, and they become more sophisticated, but it's email being the attack surface. Identity theft is really a prevalent form of attack. Essentially, identity or credentials is the nirvana state for threat actors. The moment they have your credentials, even somebody who seemingly from an org chart standpoint, a innocuous, if that's the right word, part of the organization, somebody who doesn't seemingly have access to anything that's particularly valuable, they do have access to the network, and that's kind of where it starts, right? And so threat actors are incredibly patient. So the moment they get access into your environment, they're incredibly adept at being patient, using reconnaissance, surveying your environment, and then waiting for the best time to exploit or to understand where they can launch their exploit, and then launching that exploit. Evolution, and I should say identity theft. I mean, so MFA, multi-factor authentication attacks bypassing MFA have been a big theme. Email fraud, I talked about this a little bit earlier. This is the most costly form of attack for healthcare and for all industries. So that's something that, particularly with healthcare, is very sophisticated and very diverse. Supply chain network, supply chain fraud within the email environment, or email fraud within the supply chain environment is something that we see as a constant sort of thorn in the side. Ransomware, if I know that certainly from my standpoint, every hospital executive teams I talk to are very consumed by ransomware, because the way that can cripple an organization, and certainly beyond anybody who has any knowledge of IT or cybersecurity, there are a lot of focus on ransomware as an area of threat for a really good reason.
Ryan, there's a question. Are secure KVMs used in healthcare systems to segregate public and private networks to prevent hacks or data leakages across networks? If not, why?
That's a great question. They are. Are they used as prevalently as they should be? Probably not. And I guess, how do I answer this question the right way? If you look at the most, I referenced the most recent HIM cybersecurity survey, and it's a survey, so we have to understand that it's not scientific, but it is a reflection of the what's going on in the community. HIMSS have been running their cybersecurity survey, gosh, I don't know, for many years now, probably around 10 years now. Every few years, they ask the question of, basically they list a whole range of capabilities, and they say, to what degree are these things installed in your environment? And so everything from basic, antivirus, firewall, and then they kind of get, as they kind of go down the list, it gets more sophisticated in terms of the level of prevalence of these things. So the bottom line is, for the survey results, and they've been very consistent over the years, they haven't changed that much, which does give some substantiate the data and the results, is there are so many healthcare institutions that just struggle getting more basic blocking and tackling technologies deployed, like antivirus, like encryption, like firewalls, that when you start getting into KVMs, they just haven't, in many cases, haven't got there yet. So don't be surprised. I guess when I talk to the community, they perpetually have a laundry list of about 20 things they want to do from a cybersecurity sort of standpoint, and invariably they get to five or six of them at any one point in time. So yes, for the much larger, more sophisticated organizations who have really embraced virtualization as part of their environment, they are using KVMs. But for many organizations, that's just on their to-do list, something they would like to get to.
Thank you.
Sure. One of the things that we want to note with regards to ransomware is how that is evolving. So we have noticed what we calling TOAD, or telephone-oriented attack delivery, has been a significant change within the environment. So recognizing more and more that people are becoming nervous about clicking on links. They've learned that through their cybersecurity awareness training sort of modules. They are using something called TOAD, or basically pretty quickly directing you to a call center, where the threat actor then can respond to that call center. It's a way to substantiate or make the claim in the email feel more realistic, and it's working. It's working because if you think about many of the cybersecurity training modules do talk about take a interrupt, call to make sure that the request being sent is a legitimate request. And so calling is one of those things that is a legitimate sort of form of interrupt. In this case, of course, they're providing you a number of the call, so that's convenient, but problematic too. So anyway, just be mindful that this is one way the marketplace has definitely evolved. Looking at the healthcare sort of marketplace, I used to think this number was very widely known, but it astounds me. I guess it's not as widely known as I thought it was. Healthcare data or medical data is still very, very highly valuable. There's a lot of it on the dark web, but it's a foundation for identity theft. So it's way more valuable than, say, credit card data. It's harder to monetize, but it has much more broader ability for monetization when you can actually crack somebody's identity, or you can steal valuable IP around, say, clinical research or whatever. So you don't have the instant return that stealing a credit card does, or stealing a gift card, but you do have a much more elongated return that can give you a much broader return, stealing healthcare data, medical data, which is why this community in general, or this industry in general, is way more attacked than any other industry. And that's reflected in the cost for this industry to recover from a breach. Pony1 and IBM have been doing this study for a long, long time now. And so it's a good barometer about where the community sees, or where the activity is most prevalent. And for as long as I've been watching this data and watching these reports being delivered kind of year in, year out, healthcare unfortunately still seems to be, not seems, it's the top of this list. And not by a little bit, by a long way. So this basically is just the cost for the industry to recover from a cyber event. And you have the number in 2022 and 2023 here. You can see it's essentially virtually doubled the next closest industry, and more than doubled every other industry. The presumption is that healthcare has not made the commensurate investments, and this kind of goes back to the KVM sort of discussion, in more basic blocking and tackling. And so until healthcare makes that investment, and my private theory has been the meaningful use era was challenging and problematic for healthcare because there was an over rotation on privacy and being compliant. I should say compliancy more than privacy. Over rotation on compliancy to get meaningful use dollars. And I think in too frequently, organizations knew they were being compliant, but they weren't necessarily being secure. So you fast forward to 2022, 2023, where this data measures, and yes, healthcare still tops the chart from the ability to recover from a breach from a cost standpoint.
Ryan,
yes.
There's a question. Is there a current value on medical record data? I think I remember it says $50 per medical record from a long while ago.
Yeah, I have not seen that was the value of medical data versus a credit card. So I haven't seen more recent data on that, but it kind of depends on what data we're talking about. So, I kind of alluded a little bit earlier about research data. Research data tends to be very highly sought after, particularly from nation state actors, nation states or other countries who are trying to build out their sort of own capability within their country. So during COVID in particular, when we were doing all that vaccination research, you were looking at kind of like the prevalent nation state actors trying to steal that data. That data is very, very valuable. I don't know a number on that, but we shouldn't just think of that in terms of COVID. I only use that to illustrate the point. If you have an institution on this call, your institution is known for some form of clinical research, even research that maybe publicly would be considered to be pretty obscure, unlike, say, COVID vaccine data. If you're known for that, it's very likely that the bad actor knows you're known for that as well. And that data will be incredibly valuable to them. I can't put a number on that, but I mean, it's highly sought after.
Thank you.
This is where we've seen strong prevalence of attacks across multiple segments of healthcare. You can see here we're measuring academic healthcare institutions, your broader hospital systems, clinical research hospitals, residential and post-acute care, and this just measures clicks. MFA collection, MFI bypass is one of the things that we have seen as an area of strong activity, as well as with these JavaScript and HTA sort of techniques where they're using essentially Trojans to gather data. Mindful of time, moving on here a little bit. Here is a targeted sort of threat example. If you have SAP in your environment, we have seen examples like this where people are trying to, replicate in a pretty convincing manner, I should say, that environment and use it as a form of attack and trying to get you to log into your environment. Office 365 is so challenging. There's so many. It's not the only sort of cloud environment that gets attacked, to be sure, but Office 365 and that environment is so widely utilized by healthcare and by others that it's not only a place where a lot of attacks are targeted on this environment. A lot of attacks, unfortunately, are housed in this environment. So the attacks will be launched from this environment into your coworkers or into your community or into your health system, and it just makes it, when it comes seemingly from within your environment, you can see how challenging that is to navigate, whether that is a legitimate sort of cyber risk. So very, very hard for the recipient of the email when it comes from this sort of cloud property to know what to do with it. One of the things, and I think maybe if I think about, at least from my point of view, the most promising promising sort of development within cybersecurity within healthcare is the understanding that a cyber event now is directly related to the industry or to the health institution's ability to essentially deliver against their mission or to deliver against patient care, and that a cyber event have disrupted patient care delivery. So it's no longer about reputational harm or financial harm, about being non-compliant. Those things all matter, of course. When it becomes related to your mission and your inability to deliver against your mission, then that I've seen hospital boards and executive teams really stand up and take note of that. There's been a lot of very problematic stories over the last few years where, health institution essentially loses access to their systems for a month to 6 weeks, and their ability to provide any sort of care to their community is significantly hampered. So we try to measure that. Proofpoint tried to measure that with Ponymon, one of those very prevalent sort of organizations that look at the cybersecurity landscape. And we had a report we launched around this time last year. The 2023 version of this report is literally due and will be launched within about 2 to 3 weeks. And so we looked at to what degree supply chain attacks, BEC attacks, ransomware attacks, and cloud compromises have impacted patient care. And what we saw was the following. This is a survey. So again, it's not a scientific peer-reviewed sort of conclusion, but it is a survey of those in the industry and their perception about how these various attacks have impacted patient care. Everything from delays in procedures, longer lengths of stay in the hospital, increasing prevalency of people being transferred to a different facility, increased complications, and an increase, unfortunately, in the most critical state and the mortality rate. And I know this sounds in some ways really dire, and it is really dire. I think there actually is quite a significant silver lining in that the industry now does talk a lot about, cybersecurity as being an overall core component of patient care. and you need to build up the defenses of your security posture to make sure that you're not compromising your ability to provide patient care. So it's in the same way you need to invest in more modalities, or you need to invest in medical supplies, clinical support staff, whatever. They all help provide patient care. This is now seen in a very similar sort of vein. So moving on to how to use threat insight to better protect healthcare. I mentioned a little bit earlier, there's a lot of data available about who within healthcare is most attacked, which department is most attacked. Proofpoint provides some of that research. Others provide that research. I guess I would ask you, if you're not available to that research or haven't seen that research, think about your own institution, and generally those who are being attacked tend to fall into at least one of these three categories. Who is vulnerable in the way that they work? So, or in the way that they work in terms of the type of job that they have, i.e. they have to download files, they have to click on links, or they're just vulnerable in that you're happy clickers, they have a propensity to click on more things than they should. Maybe they fail some of your cybersecurity awareness training, or your phishing penetration test, or the nature of their job means they're on risky or third-party sort of devices. I mean, just the way they work makes them vulnerable. Secondly is who just gets targeted. Who gets targeted? It could be your VIPs, the people in your organization have a very strong sort of public persona, so they're being targeted. It could be people within your organization who very actively promote, they're a clinical researcher, they're a specialist surgeon, and they're known in their field, so they get targeted. And then lastly, it's almost the opposite of your VIP, who is within your organization was deemed to be access to data that's very valuable. So it could be a security administrator, it could be somebody in your accounts payable department, it could be somebody in your HR department, it could be a administrator in your research organization. They don't necessarily have any sort of public persona, but they have access to valuable data. If you hit one of these categories, you likely are being targeted. If you hit more than one of these categories, you are exponentially likely to be targeted. And these are your areas where you should start looking at where you can layer in your defenses. Email is very problematic. And like I said, according to HIMSS, 70+% the initial point of compromise. There are a lot of security tools you can do to layer in your defenses to make sure that those people within your institution who are receiving email, which I guess is most people, have a limited ability to make a judgment on the type of emails that are being received. So this is an example here of what we call a threat funnel. This is an anonymized pediatric care institution. But this is pretty typical what we see right across the board. So they're getting 90+ emails overall delivered to them. Very significant of those are blocked because of the IP reputation. So 72 million of the 90 or 91 are being blocked. Another 7 million are being blocked based on putting in that email into some sort of a sandbox sort of environment. They can go analyze a little bit more carefully the nature of that email, and then a conclusion is made on that. And these analyzation happens really, really quickly. So it's not like it's a delay to your organization that's meaningful. We then see, very strong, what we call targeted attack protection, where either based on attachment or URLs, seemingly on the surface of it, 8,000 or 27,000 emails are being blocked. Those are actually in some cases, or in most cases, I should say, like the most critical emails to block because they're very, very targeted. They tend to be much more sophisticated. They require much greater analysis. And then they're, in many cases, they're detonated within the environment, i.e. within the sandbox. So they have no sort of exposure. When you sift all this out, of the 91 million that get sent, only 12 million get delivered. And so I think this is one area that I would recommend in terms of make sure you're layering in your email protection so that your community is not having to make a judgment themselves on all 91 million emails that are being sent in. You've sifted out as much as you possibly can to make that easier for them to make a conclusion about whether they want to interact with that form of email. We do a lot of analysis about what job function within a health system is being targeted. You can kind of see here in this graph throughout the course of the latter part of last year and the early part of this year, which job functions were being targeted. These graphs historically really do surprise me because I'm not really always what I think are going to be on top or on top. So for whatever reason, in Q3 of last year, the ambulatory clinic was most heavily attacked. I mean, we don't talk to threat actors. We don't know their motivations, but this gives you an example of who's being attacked. In this case here, in a different segment of healthcare, pharmacy was being heavily attacked. I'm going to go here a little bit quicker. We have seen time and time again, this is probably like the most heinous side of cyber criminal activity in healthcare. Hospice organizations, if you have a hospice department within your organization, they are heavily attacked for all sorts of reasons, we believe. We believe because of the good nature of the people who work in those communities. I believe because of they're more prevalent, or they're more likely to click on things or have this kind of caring nature. They care about the wellness and the comfort of the patient. And so they're more inclined to be helpful that way. I think in some institutions, they got a broader access to the patient record. So this is just an area of attack that's one to look out for. And we've also seen several examples in a residential care sort of facility that those people get attacked. And the point of showing you these examples is that it's not just your VIPs, it's not just those with a public persona. Threat actors have their own motivations. We don't always know what they are, but they've analyzed this community really, really closely and have made a determination that these parts of your community are worthy of attack, again, for whatever reason. So if you have these part of your institutions, these organizations or these functions or these departments, just be mindful they could be under attack. This is an example of what we call a VAP chart, or very attacked persons chart. These bar charts, these bars represent an email address which has been redacted. This is a large teaching hospital, and of all the, I think there's 20 to 30,000 email addresses in this institution. The top 20 here are almost all related to clinical research, people in the clinical research team. So they figured out that of all the people they want to attack and the tens of thousands of people institution, almost all the attacks, or the lion's share of the attacks, as to say, are going to the clinical research team. That's not by coincidence. Like, they figured this out. They're doing the social engineering. They're doing the reconnaissance on on this particular institution, and they will take the same level of approach for the most part, everybody they're attacking. So just, like I said, if you think you're known for something, even if it's obscure, then if that can be monetized, it's a good chance they're attacking that part of your institution. Protecting identity. Yes.
So there's a question, I think it's very poignant to this. It says, there are relatively low-cost private sector technologies that minimize online access to individuals' personal and contact information, and which also help people set their privacy controls on their social media sites. Do you see a role for this type of technology in the healthcare system, particularly as zero trust architecture is being more broadly adopted, and in the context of the recent NIST report, Guide to Protecting the Confidentiality of Personally Identifiable Information, making it harder for hackers to find email addresses, phone numbers, etc., of employees if possible? But it appears that there's a big gap in healthcare.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. I think there is a role for that. To me, the main takeaway, there's a lot of data we covered on this presentation. The one thing I would like to leave the community with is understand that not every email address or every job function or every department is treated equally by a threat actor. There are some who are way more valuable to that community, and therefore they really focus their efforts on people who they believe will yield them the best return on their attack effort. So then you kind of get onto this philosophical conversation about, okay, then what do you, if you understand who's likely to be attacked, what do you do to protect them? And then as this question alludes to, it's a much more philosophical sort of conversation about whether that's some of these kind of like third-party sort of technologies and capabilities that should be utilized, whether it's better training, whether it's changing your procedures. I mean, that's something that I think your mileage will definitely vary, and you got to think about what's right for your institution. But I think that the key is understanding who's likely to be attacked, and then what can you do about it. And so, yes, I would agree, though, those kind of low-cost online sort of tools can certainly help.
Thank you.
Sure.
There's another question that says, I note your slides are proprietary. Would it be permissible to use one or two of them for a social media post on LinkedIn?
Thank you. Yeah, we will, after this webinar, these slides will be sent to you. I am correct in saying that, aren't I?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we will distribute them, correct, with the CPHEMS credit.
Right, yeah. So I guess you can use them as you wish. I'm mindful here, we're up against time. Do you want me to carry on with the presentation, or do you want to just end up with a couple more questions? How do you want to do that? Elisa? That was a question for me to you, really.
I apologize. I thought I was off mute.
Sure.
I would go ahead and proceed because you're pretty close to finishing up, and I don't have any more questions in the Q&A right now.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've seen is the threat landscape is very focused on trying to get credentials, trying to get privileged credentials, people who if they get your credentials, they can essentially bypass your Active Directory, your PAM sort of environment. And it's really, in many cases, just inefficient to stop a lateral movement within the organization. So they're bypassing all those great controls we talked about in that sort of email funnel. They're able to bypass all that because they already have credentials. So how do you stop that form of attack? And it's, becoming really, really problematic in that, and right across multiple industries. And all organizations do have these vulnerable identities. This is just some research from this Verizon report that I referenced a little bit earlier. 100% of organizations have service account risk. Almost all have local admins who are not enrolled necessarily within your PAM environment. Almost all organizations have shadow administrators. And even 13% of organizations have exposed privileged credentials back into the World Wide Web, so to speak. The point being is this area is strongly being exploited by threat actors, and so the takeaway is think about your organization and whether this is something that looks like could be your environment. it's a way that really they bypass the attack chain, quite significantly. Let me just move on here. And so really focus on this. How do you mitigate against that? So how can you cut off those common attack paths? How do you prevent sort of privilege escalation? How can you detect abuses, credential abuses in your active domain and sort of environment, your other sort of endpoint environment? And there are capabilities here that are worthwhile exploring. It's one of those layers of defenses that I find quite regularly on healthcare cybersecurity sort of to-do list, want to install list. It's one of those things where if you've had exposure to a breach and you see how that breach occurred, more and more, this is an area that they want to block off. At least I recognize I'm out of time, so I'm going to probably halt it there. I thank everybody for joining. I hope this was valuable. We covered a lot of information over the hour. These slides will be made available to you. Thank you for the time. I do appreciate it.
And thank you, Ryan. And I will just let everyone know that if you do take a moment to leave after today's, there's a survey. And if you do think of a question that you do have for Ryan, there's a place there to enter that question, and or you can shoot us an email and we'll get an answer for you. That PowerPoint presentation along with the CPM's credit will be sent later this week. So thank you again, Ryan, for joining us today and presenting to our New England HIMSS membership. Have a good day.
Have a good day.